Hi guys, this episode of the Here's Crack podcast covers topics of mental health, anxiety and depression. If you need any help or want more information, please click the links in the description of this podcast. Thanks. This podcast is also sponsored by 4Gears Marketing Agency. Whether you're seeking to establish a better online presence, increase your sales, or connect with your audience in a more meaningful way, partner with 4Gears today, reach out to them and see how they can take your brand or business to the next level. How's it going, people? Welcome back to another episode of the Here's the Crack podcast. Today, we are joined by Marina McCulley. How's it going?
Good.
This is your first podcast, is it, Marina?
Well, no, maybe did a wee one before.
That's grand. But this is part where I normally hand over the likes of yourself to just explain who you are and what it is you do.
Okay, so I am the head of education and training in the East Office here in Belfast for Aware NI. So Aware NI are the depression charity for Northern Ireland. So we would support people with their mental health. So whether that's in prevention, sort of preventing any mental health issues or problems, or helping them manage their illness. So we particularly support people with depression, bipolar, and those suffering from low mood or anxiety.
Yeah. And you've been working for, you said Aware NI for 11, coming on 11 years?
I have, yeah. I started as a sessional trainer for them. And then, so that was back in 2013. At that time, I was running my own business as well. And then I moved into the office in 2015. And then I've stayed there ever since.
Yeah.
Loved it. Yeah.
And
great.
What was it you did before? Obviously, you owned a business, but what was it you, whenever you say sessional trainer, like what does that mean whenever you start it off?
So it means that, so we would have, like even today, we would have about 50 sessional trainers that work for Aware.
Wow.
So they would go out and deliver training for us into the schools, workplaces, community groups.
Yeah.
So it's people who would have, like myself, who would have had a particular interest in personal development, stress management, CBT, mental health. And people who want to, I suppose, educate people on signs and symptoms of poor mental health and where to go and get support. So we still would employ those people because we're a charity. We're never sure how much funding we're getting in any one year. Mm-hmm. So we could deliver, like last year we delivered 1,200 programs, but it could be next year we only deliver 500 or the hope is we'd deliver 2,000, you know, so we have to go with what's happening, I suppose. We're never guaranteed. So we can't guarantee people work all the time, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And what was it sort of got you into that line of work, if you don't mind me asking, like in terms of that?
I've just always had a passion for mental health, but I suppose particularly my interest would have been in stress management and personal development, so sort of overcoming limiting beliefs, overcoming those intrusive thoughts, overcoming sort of past experiences and maybe learning from them, or I suppose not defining yourself as the things that happen to you in life. So that would have been where my own particular passion would have come from. So I would have delivered a lot of Aware's CBT-based program, which is Living Life to the Full. It's a 6-week program. And it's life skills, which is really personal development. And a big part of that would be looking at those unhelpful thoughts and how we challenge them and how we acknowledge that they're there, not pretend they're not there, but then learn techniques to challenge them. So I love that part of, in our training programs. I love when people get like a wee chink of light or a wee light switch goes on, you go, right, okay, maybe I can think about that a different way, or I didn't see it like that, or maybe they make a change and they go and ask for help or something. So
what was it like 10 years ago? Because even you're saying there you have roughly 50 people like trainers. What it has been as big a department then, or as big, like, with people that talked about mental health as much 10 years ago?
Oh, it's really changed. I mean, it's talked about much more now, thankfully, and the stigma is definitely nowhere near what it was like. There still is a lot of stigma around mental health, particularly, I suppose, mental illness, not so much mental health as such now. People are happy to say, I do this for my mental health, or, they're looking at things to look after themselves, but there's still that stigma around people saying, I'm not well, or I need a wee bit of help. But definitely has changed hugely, which is great. particularly in the school systems, and for young people, they're a wee bit more aware now of maybe when they're not feeling so well. And I suppose the schools and that have some resources, but again, we would always be campaigning for better resources for people, for both children and adults.
Yeah.
Would you say that's important, like getting in whenever they are at such a young age, rather than sort of leaving it till maybe later on in
Absolutely.
life?
Absolutely. I think it's like anything. I would always compare, physical illness and mental illness, or physical health and mental health. It's getting that message to people to look after your mental health just the same as you look after your physical health. Like if you had a sore knee or a sore throat or whatever, you wouldn't let it go on and on until it gets really bad.
Yeah.
But talking to people, I think, or children when they're younger, or teaching them techniques how to manage when maybe they're overthinking or they're feeling anxious, or they're I suppose maybe noticing when they need a wee bit of help and support, and it's maybe not accessible to them. So I think when we're in the schools, it's just signposting people or bringing it to their attention. This is as important as if you've hurt yourself playing football. If your mind is not, if you're not coping with things, or there's something going on at home, or you're just naturally, because you can be born with, low mood, not even born with low mood, like as in a baby's born with low mood, but you can develop or have a mental illness the same way as you can develop or have a physical illness.
Yeah.
So it's really just about getting that message out as soon as possible.
What sort of age would you try and get in there? I suppose there's maybe the happy medium of too early to but
Well, I
not
suppose
too
it
late at the
depends
same
on
time.
what. So we would deliver different programs. We would deliver what we call prevention programs, and then early intervention, which is when people are maybe portraying signs and symptoms. And then there's recovery programs. So the recovery programs would be when somebody has been unwell and they're now wanting to get back into recovery or maintain good mental health. But the earliest we get in at the moment is like P3, P4.
Oh, really?
Jesus.
Wow.
So not with recovery programs now.
Yeah.
But with programs, so we have a little program called My Mind and Me. And it's really just teaching the kids about how their brain works and their mind, and how, sometimes it runs away and sometimes you have to pull it back, and just identifying when they might be feeling a wee bit, even not unwell, but, just a wee bit out of sorts, or, struggling to manage their emotions. So that's a wee program, My Mind and Me. And then another program which we deliver in the schools to P5, so 9 to 11-year-olds, is what they call Pause B. So it's a mindfulness program, which is a fab wee program. So it's a 6-week program. Ideally, we would love that to be in the schools. So as part of a project that we're running, we are training teachers in that program, so that the teachers themselves will be able to deliver it to the kids. So that program in particular helps the children to learn that when they're having a difficult emotion, that it's okay to feel it and it's okay to sit with it. So
How does that work over, like, is it 6-week training, as in maybe once a week for 6 weeks, and it's the teachers you're training, not like you don't go into the schools with the children, do you?
no, we train the children.
Oh, you train
so
the
we
children.
train the children, but long term we would love it to be left in the school, so that we're not having to, continually go in and do that. So that it's part of, ideally it would be part of the school curriculum, that the children are taught to manage their mental health the same as they are their physical health. So we go in, once a week for an hour. Every week for 6 weeks, and each week we teach them a different technique. So they might learn a breathing technique, or they might learn, how there's one, feet on the floor and back on the chair, and it's just about maybe just coming in. How do you get your mind to stop again, or to calm down, or if you're distressed, or if you were in conflict in the playground. So a lot of the teachers have said, that after we've been in and they've done the programs, they can see the difference in the children. Then even if they were in an argument in the playground or something, they're able to calm themselves down a wee bit more. Or you have other kids who are maybe a wee bit more withdrawn, and it's, the teachers are more aware of how to spot that, and maybe use the techniques then to bring them out again. Like, what is it you're thinking? What is it you're feeling? What's going on?
It's interesting because I suppose whenever you talk about, like, I know whenever you said there about like the you're going in, you're delivering something at P3 level.
Mm-hmm.
Suppose we look at like mental health as a topic that is such a like a almost look at it like a very mature topic to discuss, and I suppose there's a lot of stuff within that sort of umbrella that it is a mature topic to talk about. But I suppose like coming from like a country school background, I know with like we were saying, oh, we're teaching kids about mental health and all that there, you may get some of the negative feedback from parents which are sort of like, well, I'm not sure that's like they're so young and exposing them to that sort of stuff. But I suppose that whenever you're talking about it like that, it makes sense because these are the tools that are gonna sort of kids are gonna take into later life.
Build resilience.
And obviously it's almost like if they learn it when they're young, it may prevent a more serious problem in the future. So I suppose like whenever you maybe would hear, I don't know how that's sort of recepted in schools,
I think what you've raised is a really common issue is that when we think of mental health, we think of mental illness.
Yeah.
But that's not what it is.
Yeah.
Mental health is like, if you think of physical health, you don't think of physical illness.
Yeah.
You don't think of, well, what's wrong with me? Let's talk about my physical health. You're not thinking, what do I need help with? So it's really it's changing the narrative around that, as in when you're talking about mental health, you're just talking about your well-being.
Yeah.
You're just talking about how your mind works. You're talking about how you're thinking. You're talking about how you feel and what, might be happening in your body, what sensations are running in your body, or how are you behaving. So we're talking there about, maybe somebody withdrawn or something. Well, it's maybe identifying a wee behaviour. And that doesn't mean somebody's not well.
Mm-hmm.
It just means somebody's like, the same as if somebody was in the playground and they were hurt.
Yeah.
You go, have you hurt yourself? And so it's the same. It's changing the narrative around it so that, it's not mental illness. We're not going in to talk about mental illness.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're going in to talk about, let's look after your mental well-being.
Yeah.
And is there like you're just saying about maybe kids being withdrawn and stuff, is there almost like categories of kids? Just thinking of any parents listening, maybe who think, oh, my kid would be a bit withdrawn. Is there like any way you manage that in terms of like different things for different kids to like help with their mental health?
I suppose there are different kids who will connect with different practices.
Mm-hmm.
So there are some, that will connect with the breathing techniques, and they'll be aware that, there's different sensations in their body or something. So they'll maybe connect with them, whereas other children might connect with the way they're thinking or how they need to say something out or talk to somebody. I suppose when you're going into maybe different, if you're talking about maybe somebody is particularly withdrawn or anxious or whatever, then you might be looking at, I suppose it's then identifying, which is what we do, not at that young age now, but older age, we would identify where's that boundary when it changes from, dealing with, like, say, a problem or an issue or a feeling that you don't understand, going on into, right, maybe I, am suffering from a bit of anxiety or depression or whatever. Not at that, I'm not talking that very young age now, but we would identify those types of things in post-primary schools then.
Mm-hmm. What would be some, like, almost like the preventative things? Is there things that you spot where you're like, we sort of need to have a look at that? Like, what would be those, like, maybe it is anxiety and stuff for the way they behave? Like, what are those type of things?
Yeah, well, I suppose you'd have to identify the difference between the behaviours. Is it just a behaviour, or does the child need a bit of extra help or support? And again, you would have to go to a mental health professional or, a GP and just raise it. I mean, if it's a younger child, raise it with, your health visitor or, somebody who's in the school, if there's a school counsellor or a well-being.
That's something I wanted to ask. I think like that's almost like a common enough thing now, like counsellors are actually in schools, whereas like I know my sister's high school, like the high school me and Shay went to, I think has one now, but like is that sort of a new thing? Because I know when we went to high school, there was never anything like that. Like,
Well, the past 10 years now, there would be, yeah. Unfortunately, again, there was some changes in the funding around counselling in the school, but nearly almost every school had a counsellor.
right?
And there was a programme where, and again, when we go into post-primary schools, we will always ask the group of pupils, you know, do you know there is a school? We'll check with the school before we go in. Is there a school counsellor?
Yeah.
How do they access the school counsellor? Is there a waiting list? Is it discreet enough where somebody's not going to feel that they can access it and there's, you know, there isn't so many barriers to it? But yeah, it's very common now. There's definitely an identified need in the schools years ago. And again, that would be part of what we would do. We would go into a school if there wasn't a facility there. We can highlight that to the teachers or to the principal or vice principal and say, or pastoral care, you know, listen, we were in with a class today and they've identified that there isn't a service and that there's a need.
Yeah. And how did, like you're saying, a couple of years ago, he's really identified it? Like, what was things really bad back then, like a couple of years ago in schools and stuff with kids? Or was it?
I don't think that it's as such that they're really bad. There's always been a need.
Yeah.
I mean, again, it's going back to changing that narrative of we've always had, you know, mental health problems, mental illness. That's always been. It's just not always been acknowledged, or the need for help has been acknowledged.
Yeah.
So I think now that there is more of a conversation, then more people are saying, actually, I need help. So therefore, the need is identified more, if that makes sense.
It's more.
It's not that it's a new thing.
Yeah, it's not. There's just more of like a light on it now. Like people are more aware of it.
Yeah,
I think that is like it's a good point that you raised there. Like sort of taking, obviously we talk about mental health and it's all, you know, it's in the news and it's very widely spoken about. But then I suppose there's that narrative where people almost look at it in a negative way. Where when you get into that topic, it's like, oh, park the brakes here, like because it is relatively fresh for some people. So I think I heard about that recently where, you know, someone was saying, you know, your mental health is just as important as your physical health. You know, if you notice yourself maybe putting on a few pounds, you want to increase your exercise and physically and I suppose for your mental health, it's like looking at ways. And even recently with people going into like, oh, I find like ice baths or sea dips really help with, or, you know, reading as opposed to going on my phone and in the late evening, like things like that. I suppose I think Tommy briefly touched on it there, but like if there is any sort of parents or whatever who do have like young kids, like what are some like maybe some tips that you would give for like maybe at home, you know, maybe educating the kids on, you know, looking after themselves and from that, who maybe don't have access to a program like yourself.
Yeah. So it's probably a few of the things that you've mentioned there. Like the Public Health Agency would advocate for what's called Take 5. So it's 5 ways to wellbeing. And that would be, hopefully I'm going to remember them all now. So, connect, be active, keep learning, take notice and give.
5 out of 5.
So sometimes it's just sort of on that. It's maybe looking at, right, and you were talking again there, you know, what would you do if a child's maybe withdrawn or a wee bit? It's again maybe lifting up one of them. Let's go for a walk. You know, let's get out of here. Let's put, as you say, instead of scrolling on the phone, which we know affects kids' sleep. You know, the energy drinks, the caffeine, things like that all affect a person's mood. So it's maybe the likes of that is like being active. So let's go do something. Let's take the dog for a walk. Let's go outside. Let's go into nature and take notice. You know, you going outside, often people don't take notice of what's around them, or, you know, the amount of times, and we were talking about going to school. Many times did you go to school and nearly go right up and into the school and you didn't notice the gardens or what was around or whatever. And just choosing one of them, again, I suppose. Keep learning is another thing. It's like we do learn from the phones and stuff, but there are lots of other ways to learn as well.
Yeah.
You know, reading, as you said, is one of them, but like playing music or an instrument, or, you know, even listening to music or podcasts, you know, anything at all. Just different ways to learn or think about things differently. You can get lost scrolling, or you can get lost, you know, ruminating over something that's maybe happening.
Have you noticed, like, with technology becoming such popular now, and like kids obviously having phones, it's such a normal thing to have like a smartphone at such a young age. Like, how have you noticed the difference in children over the last 10 years, even like their behavior and stuff?
We've noticed a big difference in connection.
Yeah.
So like, you know, we all noticed in COVID, whenever we lost that connection, just the big impact that had on people. And I think the phones do contribute to that. When you spend so much time on your phone, you're not connecting with people the same way, you know, in that conversation, you're not picking up eye contact or cues when people are maybe not feeling well. You know, somebody be sending a text message or smiley face, you know, seen it with loads of people all the time. You do the smiley face and then the next minute, you know, when the phone's down, it's a different story. Social media puts a lot of pressure on people.
Yeah.
And so that's a big thing.
Is that a big topic you would do in your programs now?
In our Mood Matters young people, so we would deliver that into the schools to 14 to 18-year-olds, and that would be one of the things that would come.
And what would be like some of the stuff you'd cover? Because I think it's such an important thing, like social media now, and like you said yourself, like there's so much pressure on people, like whether it's like feeling like they need to look a certain way or whatever. Like
totally.
What do you cover in your program?
So we would allow the kids in the class themselves to bring up any issues that are affecting. So one of our questions would be what affects your mental health, and we put them into groups, you know, so they do interactivities, and we'll ask them what would affect your mental health, and 9 times out of 10 those are the things that come up, you know, bullying, social media, body image, pressures of parents, maybe pressure from parents for exam results or whatever, pressure from peers. So there are lots of things that would come out from the young people themselves. So we'll try and work with that, and we'll constantly adapt and change our programs to make things relatable. Because as you said, 10 years ago, you know, we didn't have, you know, you wouldn't have had a 13-year-old have a phone 10 years ago, whereas now they do. So you have to keep continually asking, what is it that's currently affecting your mental health?
And like for social media, how do you, like, what would you say, even like we're talking about parents and kids, like I could only imagine trying to get your child to like spend less time on your phone. It's not an easy conversation to have, but like, is there any sort of ways of going about it you'd recommend? Or?
I suppose it's just setting boundaries and limits, you know, limiting the time that you spend on social media, particularly before bedtime. So we would say in our programs as well that an hour before sleep is best to set the phone down, because it affects your sleep pattern, your rapid eye movement, REM. So if the kids can put the phone down an hour before they're going to bed, they're more likely to sleep better. Yeah, I'm sure you've noticed it yourself. I noticed it myself. When you're sitting, you know, with the phone, and then you put it down, and then you're, you know. It's
probably difficult to try and explain that to kids, though.
It is.
The logistics of it.
Yeah, I suppose it's if the parents, you know, take that on board and know that it really is going to help your child. I mean, the biggest things to affect your mental health are your sleep and the food that you eat and the activity that you're doing. So, if you get a good sleep, you're more likely to wake up. You're not going to be tired. You're not going to be irritable. You know, things aren't going to escalate just as big. Like we would talk about, you know, how your jug fills up, and like if you've got this much in your jug and you've already got something happening, like say, you know, maybe a big exam or something, you know, we're in May now, kids are doing their exams.
Your brother's doing his A-levels at the moment.
Yeah, so that in itself fills your jug. You know, you're waking up and in the morning and that's already in it. If you're not getting a good night's sleep, that's added on the top, and then your mom says, and then the next minute the jug overflows, and you know, there's likely an argument in the house, but it's usually because there's already something in the jug before you wake up. So getting a good sleep is really important.
I think there was a lot in the news recently about them trying to ban phones completely in UK schools.
Really?
And stuff.
Wow.
Yeah, but do you think that is a good idea, and completely cutting it out, or do you think that would cause maybe more?
I mean, there's like everything. There's advantages and disadvantages, isn't there? It's like anything. It's in moderation, and if you notice that it's impacting, you know, often, especially young kids who spend a lot of time on the screen, come off and maybe their behavior changes. Again, because there's a lot of activity, and the brain needs a wee while to just
Readjust.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
I think it's the way you look at the phones as well, because like I know recently, like the way I've sort of started seeing my screen time as in on my phone is less like relaxation and more stimulation, if that makes sense. Like you're
Yeah.
scrolling on TikTok, you're scrolling on Instagram, and you're constantly like getting this sort of hit of like, oh, there's that thing. I'll keep going and I'll read some comments and I'll do something else. Whereas like I think
Quite
it's
addictive,
yeah,
isn't
it's like recently it's like no, like it's not relaxing whatsoever. Like actually, I know it's just still a screen, but like
Yeah.
sticking on a movie on a Saturday night,
It's very
it's more
different.
relaxation than
Yeah.
like yeah. But it's
Not
an
as
interesting
close
one.
up, I
Yeah.
suppose, you know, as the phone is right in your face.
Yeah.
But it's very addictive. And I
Yeah.
suppose that's the other thing of when you're scrolling for an hour or two or whatever, you're missing out on that connection.
Yeah.
You're missing out on that activity. You're missing out on the things that are actually going to help your mood,
Yeah.
as opposed to, you know, tire you out or leave you too alert.
Yeah.
What about one thing I wanted to ask was about, like, you've mentioned activity a lot and like exercising. I don't know if it's an actual thing, but like I've younger cousins and stuff, and I feel like sports and like teams and like back when I was younger, like playing football and hurling or whatever was sort of just like it's just what you did.
Yeah.
Whereas like now I find there seems to be a lot more kids just don't want to do it or just don't get involved in it. Is that something you see regularly or?
I don't know, I suppose,
Yeah.
is the answer to that. I'm not sure of numbers and stuff, but I do know that they would spend more time on the phones. And we would always just be encouraging people to get back out,
Yeah.
you know, get out and join a group so that you do have that connection and that activity, as you say there.
Yeah.
I mean, the activity itself is, you know, any kind of movement at all is helping those endorphins get up in the brain. And, you know, you're talking about that stimulation, you know, you get energy from that, you know,
Yeah.
yourself, if you're playing football or hurling or whatever, you get that energy and you get that bit of adrenaline rush.
Yeah.
That's a healthy rush.
Yeah.
Not, as opposed to an adrenaline rush that's maybe not so healthy, and your body then can't identify, you know, am I in fight or flight here? Do I need to get out of here? And that's where anxious or anxiety symptoms can slip in, and it's not necessarily anxiety. So it's just anxiety, like it's a feeling of being anxious because you're overstimulated. Same with caffeine or energy drinks, people are overstimulated. So there's that sensation, and often people will confuse that with anxiety.
That's actually a good point to touch on is like, what's the difference? Because I got something that's maybe miscommunicated a lot online line of like, you have like people of influence being like, I have anxiety, and maybe younger people are like, oh, I have that, but it's like, you may be anxious at times, but like, what's the difference between maybe having like, you're anxious and then you have anxiety, or you know, you're feeling depressed, but then there's depression? Like, how do you identify that?
That's a great question, because that's exactly it. We have the emotion of anxiety and depression, or we have anxiety and depression that can be an illness. So the difference is that with an illness, it's more long lasting, it's more severe, and it just doesn't go away. So that's not to say that it's there all the time, but people with an anxiety disorder or with depression, the symptoms will continue and they'll be more severe. They'll start to affect a person's relationships. They'll start to affect things that they do or don't do, you know, that avoidance or withdrawal. And they will start to affect your ability to do the things that you enjoyed doing before. So particularly with depression, one of the symptoms would be when people stop doing the things that they really enjoyed doing, or they pull back. And for people with anxiety or panic disorders, they'll stop doing things for the fear of maybe having a panic attack, or because they feel quite anxious, and then the thoughts become quite intrusive. So the difference is that it's longer lasting, more severe, starts to impact relationships, work, school, things like that.
Yeah.
So if it's prolonged, you know, particularly like say 2 weeks or more.
Like if it actually starts affecting like your daily life, whether
That's
that be your job or school, is when.
Yeah.
Like, is there a way of like, when do you sort of start? I suppose you sort of maybe answered that. I was gonna say,
That's okay.
when do you identify like, maybe it's, oh, I'm just anxious every once in a while, or then it's like, oh, like, how would you advise someone who's maybe listening to this and feel like, oh, I do think I fit into that? Like, I think the last couple of weeks have really it started affecting me.
Yeah, so I think it's like it's normal to feel anxious, say like around this time of year if you're sitting exams.
Yeah.
So it's not that you have anxiety, but you're feeling anxious because you have exams coming up or there's a lot going on. If there's we talk about events, so if there's events or things happening in your life that it's out of the norm, it's out of the ordinary, then you're going to feel a bit anxious or a bit down or a bit low. So that again, they're normal feelings in response to an event that's happening, but it's when maybe it's not in response to something. So you're feeling that and you can't figure out, well, why am I feeling like that? Or, what's going on? Or, exams are long gone and now you're into the summer. There's what's called a mental health continuum, which means that, all of our, the same as our physical health, but our mental health we could be anywhere on like what they call a continuum. So you have good mental health, poor mental health, good mental health, but no diagnosis, and over here, poor mental health with a diagnosis.
Right.
Trying to remember. I think I've got that right. I'll explain it.
Sounds right.
I'll explain a scenario, hopefully. But say like something happens, so you're feeling good and you've good mental health, and then something happens, and then you go into a stress response. Normally we bounce back. So that would be your top quadrant, and we bounce back up again. So sometimes something else maybe happens, or you just haven't bounced back up. So now we start to go down into poor mental health, but we don't have a diagnosis of an illness. We're just struggling to get back up again. So it could be a big event, like maybe you didn't pass your exams or you didn't get into whatever. And I'm associating this with school, but it could be anything.
Probably a good time because like A-levels and stuff are coming in, and then we'll have results in August, and this podcast probably go out during the summer. So like, I suppose it's not a
results
like,
there.
How do people deal with that then? Like it's just you're going through a bad period. You're not.
Yeah, it's not that you have an illness. It's just you're experiencing what you would call maybe a mental health problem. But you don't even have to attach it with mental health.
Yeah.
You're just saying you're experiencing a life event that's challenging.
Yeah.
So therefore you have feelings of anxiety or, feeling depressed, but you're not clinically depressed.
Yeah.
So you don't have an illness as such. Again, going back to that continuum, it would be then if, say, something else happens. And a lot of time people end up in depression or with an anxiety disorder because they've tried to get back up so many times and something else has happened. And then suddenly you're down here with poor mental health. And now exams have passed, summer has passed, gone to university and everything's good.
Yeah.
And now you're still feeling that. So therefore it hasn't gone away. And that's when the symptoms are now longer lasting, more severe, or starting to build.
And like, what would be the next steps there? Like, say someone is like, they've felt like this for a while and they're like, I don't really know what to do now because...
Next steps is definitely go to your GP and just explain that, this has been going on for a while now. Initially maybe it was in response to something that was happening, but it's not gone away and I don't feel like back to myself. So people would generally say when they're experiencing, say, an anxiety disorder or depression, that they feel like they've kind of lost themselves a wee bit, and I just don't feel quite like myself. So you've known yourself to be different.
Yeah.
And now you're like, I'm not sure how I've got here and why I'm feeling like this. So definitely go to GP, talk to parents, talk to your friends, talk to someone. Now there's mild, moderate and severe depression, and there's mild, moderate and severe anxiety.
Yeah.
There's different types of anxiety and anxiety disorders, and there's different types of depression. So one, as they say, one shoe doesn't fit everybody.
Yeah.
So it's always good to go to GP or to talk to somebody just about how you're feeling.
Yeah, and they're all GPs trained, and I didn't actually realise that you could just go to a GP. I thought you had to go to someone that was specifically trained in talking about mental health.
No, absolutely. Go to your GP, yeah. and just chat it through, and they'll probably
They'll
assess.
refer you. Yeah.
Well, they can assess you
Okay.
themselves, and but they also can refer you then onto a mental health practitioner or a mental health professional if they feel the need.
Yeah.
You know, and a lot of the times, you know, there are different treatments. So, you know, there's self-help tools, there's medication, and there's talking therapies. And, you know, some people will be fine with just using some self-help techniques. Again, that might be your mild. Moderate might, you know, go and have some one-to-one therapy or some talking therapy or join a group therapy session. And other people will require that medication. Or you could have a combination of all three or any of the three. So again, it just depends. It depends on the assessment that the GP would give you. Depression, clinical depression is diagnosed by a medical professional. So you cannot have clinical depression unless you have a diagnosis. So again, you know, if you're concerned or a parent is concerned, absolutely take your child to the GP and just discuss, you know, maybe observe, you know, how their behavior has changed or how you noticed, you know, they've maybe been saying things or doing things differently, or their thoughts. You know, we talk about what people are saying, but it's usually your thoughts just coming out, and you might notice some thoughts that you think, oh, you know, I'm just a wee bit concerned that they're thinking a wee bit like that, or they're not talking to you. And so in that way, you know, there's a lot of thoughts going on, but they're not bringing them out into the opening. And that's usually because either one, there's too many thoughts and they're overthinking, or they're not fully understanding what's going on or what they're feeling. And that can be a very scary place for somebody.
How would you advise someone having that conversation, whether it's like someone talking to like their child, whether they be a teenager or whatever, even if it's like talking to one of your mates? Because like you'd almost imagine like they could get on the defensive of like, when you're like, if you're depressed or have anxiety, you're probably it's the last thing you want to talk about. Like, how do you go about maybe talking to that person, or maybe going and speaking to someone because you're worried about them?
I think just start with that. You know, I'm a bit worried. I'm a bit worried about you.
Yeah.
You know, I've noticed that you haven't been coming out to football. I've noticed that, you know, you haven't answered the phone to me. You know, those can be things that you would notice. So you don't have to go to somebody and say, do you think you have depression or whatever? You can just say, you know, I've noticed that you don't seem like yourself. Is everything okay? And again, you know, you don't always have to ask somebody what's going on, what's wrong or whatever. You're just pointing it out. Chances are they will have noticed themselves, or they know that they don't feel like themselves.
It'll almost be a good thing because they're like, oh, it's not just me who's noticed this. Like,
And also the opening the conversation. I've just noticed you haven't come out. You know, is there something up, or you know, what's going on? It's just simple. You know, sometimes it's just making space to have a conversation with somebody. And if people don't, sometimes, especially in young people, one of the things would be they don't answer the phone, or they don't engage in activities, or they stop doing stuff. Again, with most people with depression, those are the things that go first. But my advice to you would be, don't give up on somebody like that. You know, just because they're not coming or repeatedly coming. If they used to come and they used to love that, then you can just say that, look, you used to love coming, what's happened? Or, you know, maybe we need to talk about why you're not coming. You know, why you're not coming out to football or whatever.
One of the sort of areas that you are over as well, outside of the school side of things, which I wanted to touch on, was workplace. And I think it's quite a good topic, I think, to dive into, because obviously, like, us three, or we work. We're all quite young. We're all quite ambitious. We're in a workplace, and like we would always talk about, you know, the sort of stresses within that, in terms of, you know, you feel like you should be further along than what you are, and things like that. So I suppose, like, from a workplace experience, like how does Aware cover that side of things and educate people within that? What are some of the big things that come out of?
The big things, one of them that you've just talked about, the stresses. So you'll find that when we change from schools into workplaces, the big word that comes up is stress. So people are talking about, I'm stressed. And so the narrative changes again.
Yeah.
Stress, I think, in the workplace comes from, I suppose, again, our culture now. Our culture is very much like, as you say, you want to achieve, you want to get up higher and higher. Chances are promotion, you need to work harder. There's a lot of things with regards to not being able to say no. There's a lot of things of like, I have to do this as opposed to I want to do this. A lot of the things that we would talk about in our workplace program would be identifying when that stress is bad stress.
Yeah.
So there's good stress.
Okay.
And there's bad stress. So good stress is that
The
stress.
buzz.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That buzz, that energy, that drive. So it drives you forward. And it probably, if you looked at it a wee bit differently, like sort of like there's pressure and then there's stress. So good stress is when you have that buzz and whatever, but then that buzz goes back down again and you're able to carry on, or you get an idea and you're up and going.
Yeah.
Whereas the bad stress would be when your body can't identify now whether it's in fight or flight, or do you need me to get out of here? What needs to happen here?
Yeah.
So that stress response, if it doesn't calm down again, then you're always on high alert. So again, our programs would focus on introducing techniques to manage your stress, calm down, take a break. How do you get a work-life balance? How do you separate work till home? How do you switch off the phone, not answer the emails, but those things down? So it's looking at things like that, or what are the particular stresses? Is it people that stress you out? What are the things in work? And the HSE, which is the health executive, they would identify, 6 things that are the main stressors in the workplace. So be it demands of the job, being micromanaged or not having enough management, not having enough guidance, not knowing what your job role is.
Yeah.
Working to deadlines or targets, things like that. I think there's 6 and I've only named 5 there. So, but I'm going to give myself a tick anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah, things like that. It's like identifying what are the stressors.
Yeah. And I suppose for people who are in, maybe listening to this and they're traveling into work and they're thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to go in here today and get hit with all these deadlines and a boss that's a bit of a twat and all this here. So I suppose for practically, what can people do to alleviate that, apart from handing their notice?
No, don't be doing that. That's one of the risks, isn't it? Of making those rash decisions and you go, oh, I've had enough, I'm out of here. Mindfulness is a great tool for that.
Yeah.
So like mindfulness of even one of the simple things of being in your car and going to work. It's literally like, I am in the car going to work. Your mind's racing and and really you're not fixing anything. You're not changing the fact that your boss is a twat or that you have a deadline. It doesn't affect anything.
Yeah.
So that journey into work is really only affecting you.
Yeah.
So you're already going into work feeling stressed, or as we said earlier, your jug half full.
Yeah.
So mindfulness is a great technique for that. Like even simple things like brushing your teeth in the morning, when you get up in the morning and you're straight into it and your mind's away. And it's racing.
A routine.
Mindfulness is like a practice.
Okay.
So it's a practice of training the mind. It's a bit like what we said earlier about the kids in school, like a wee puppy that runs away and you have to train it to come back again. So mindfulness can be hard to explain to people what it is, but that's really what it is. It's practicing, training the mind to focus your attention on what it is you're doing as opposed to thinking away into the future or ruminating over the past, where you're sitting and you've something to do and you're busy thinking about everything awful that's happened or why did that happen or whatever, and your mind's way back there. Or else it's projecting a bit, like you say, like, am I gonna do well? There's pressure, is somebody else gonna get there before me or whatever, and really you're missing the task and the moment that you're in. So I suppose a lot of people would say it's a bit like being in the present moment or staying in the present moment, but it is more about focusing on what you're doing there and then, as opposed to letting the mind race away.
Yeah.
So it does take practice. And it can be like, you know, for your viewers, or it can be as simple as practicing tomorrow morning when you're brushing your teeth. Just, you know, I'm brushing my teeth.
Yeah.
Sounds so strange, but it's a really simple thing to do. Like you're eating your dinner. We do a practice as well called mindful eating. And like how many times do you just eat and it's gone and you haven't even ignored,
Yeah.
you know, you haven't even noticed what you've just had.
Yeah.
So the mindful eating is a wee exercise we do, and it's about, you know, just smelling it, tasting it, feeling what it feels like in your mouth.
Yeah.
You know, all these different things where you're just like, you're not aware, and the enjoyment then of eating. Like sometimes we use a wee segment of an orange or a minstrel. And that minstrel or that piece of orange never tasted as nice as when you just slow down.
Yeah.
It's about
I suppose the
slowing
mobile
down.
phones play into that too, because all those tasks you're saying, I'm thinking I do that while on my phone. Like say in the morning you're brushing your teeth,
Yeah,
you're sitting watching the phone, or when you're eating, you're sitting on the phone. Like
and you're not conscious.
no.
No. It would go into automatic pilot. Nearly.
Yeah.
So you have to train yourself out of it. So that's why it's called mindfulness practice, because it is practicing day by
It's
day.
so relatable. Like I can't even like the dinner thing. You're like, I can't remember the last time you actually just thought about what you were eating.
Yeah,
if
I'm
you
on
know
a
what I mean.
mission to finish it as fast as I can.
I was going to say, like, that's one of the things as well. Like, I almost find that, you know, like there's days go by and you're just like, I am in no rush. I have no need to be in a rush. But you'd swear I'd somewhere to be. Like, you're home and you're like, right, dinner on. Get it in me. What next? You know what I mean? And you're constantly like seeking
Your
that
mind's
sort of
on
like, but I suppose that's an extension of the likes of your phone. Like we're craving that sort of next hit of like, what's next, and keeping going. And I honestly, I can't even remember the last time. There's days, obviously I never have used my phone in the car, but there's days where I'd be driving to like up here and I'll like get to Tommy's house to pick him up and I'll be like, I don't even remember the journey from my house to here, because I've
Scary.
just been going over things and, you know.
It's really scary, isn't it?
Yeah.
And we can go through like a whole morning like that, or
through
a
it,
day, and
a
that's
year.
unfortunately,
A year.
that's unfortunately the culture we're in now, and so we have to deliberately break it, because it does impact on your mental well-being.
Yeah.
What just to go on the workplace thing, like, you know, obviously like there's ways to, like you're saying, practicing mindfulness and you know, being more aware of stuff, but like say there is someone who's maybe in a job that like it really is affecting them, like where do you sort of draw the line there where you're like, right, you know, there's tools here where you can help yourself, but then it's like, no, it's just that environment, you maybe need to look about maybe going somewhere else.
Yeah, well, I mean, I suppose that's again a personal choice. You have to look at the stressors and try and remove the stressors. So if it is the environment, then it's about raising that as an issue.
Yeah.
You know, this is affecting my mental well-being, but have a look around and see, is it affecting other people's? Is it just maybe not the right job for you? Or is there something in particular about the job that's stressing you out? Sometimes it's about acknowledging that maybe you're thinking. So the definition of stress is when we think the demands placed upon us exceed our ability to cope. So
stress. Let's go.
when you identify the think part of it, is that we're actually thinking, I can't cope with this. So I might be looking at you and going, you're doing your job brilliant, and oh my God, I'm stressing over here, I can't do that, because I'm really telling myself that I can't do it and I can't cope, or I'm comparing myself to you. So it may not be the job, it may be what you're thinking about the job, or it may be that you're sitting and you haven't said no, you're not being assertive, you haven't spoke up for yourself, or you're thinking, well, they should know how I'm feeling.
Yeah.
And we're assuming that people will read that, but unless you vocalize it, we all think differently. So you'll not think about something the same way as I think about it, but we assume.
Is that like a common thing maybe when you go into workplaces where you're maybe saying to people, well, why do you expect your manager to know that, or why do you expect someone to know that?
You can't. You have to say it out, you know.
Yeah.
And many times have you had a conversation with somebody and go, God, I didn't know that, or, you know, I didn't know you were thinking like that.
Yeah.
And you yourself as well, you know, sometimes you go to somebody and go, well, I thought you would have known. And that's why we get so irritated. People get very irritated and stressed, and particularly in home. husbands and wives and children and whatever. Well, you should have known that. How do I know if you don't tell me?
Yeah.
So, there's responsibility both sides. And I think in the workplace, there's always responsibility with the employer and there's a responsibility with the employee. And so, again, in our programs, we would identify the difference there because there is a responsibility on an employer to make sure your workload's not too much, to make sure that they're supporting you as a manager, or that, the environment is a healthy environment. You're getting your breaks, you're getting that time out, you're getting chance to debrief or decompress, and that's an employer's responsibility. And then you've got the other side of your own responsibility, is to say no and to take your breaks.
Yeah.
Because often in the workplace, people, you said that you're eating, it's shoveled in, and people will eat their lunch at their desk and everything. I know when I first came to Aware, I found it very strange. It was a previous manager who was there, but she used to say, right, down tools, everybody. It was our lunch was 1:15 to 2:00, and everybody went for lunch. And everybody just went into the break room and had lunch, and it was brilliant.
Yeah.
Because it was, nobody was expected to work over your lunch, or in fact, if you were working over your lunch, somebody would have went and grabbed you and went, it's lunchtime.
What are you doing? Yeah.
And those things are really important because you're neglecting your own well-being.
Yeah.
And other times people say, but I have to get that done. I have to get that done. But realistically, if you're in that kind of zone, you're not getting it done.
Yeah. No, it's interesting as well because there is that such I suppose hustle culture you could call it now, where people are almost bragging about I'm working 12 hours a day. I'm getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning. Well, what
5 o'clock? It's child's play.
Yeah, but you know what I mean. What would you say?
3:30.
What would you say to people like that? Who maybe but everyone else is working so much more than me. Is it just
I think it's looking at the cost and the payoff.
Yeah.
So is the payoff going to be worth the cost of your relationships, your well-being, your sleep, your own mood? What's it like for you to come home into your family? If you've been up at 5 a.m. and you're working all day, you're working 12-hour shifts or whatever. It's about a balance. And I think, yes, there definitely is that culture out there. If you're not busy, you're seen to be lazy or whatever. But at the end of the day, you'll find that all those people will always come back and say, gosh, I really should have been looking after myself, because you're at the risk of burnout. And we can do that. We can continue on like that for quite a long time. But again, like I talked about the fight or flight, if your body's constantly in fight or flight mode, then it's not going to recognize when it's genuinely in danger or not in danger. So therefore, those anxiety symptoms start to build up.
What would you talk much about burnout in the workplace?
Just recognizing that, if you don't take those breaks, if you do overwork, if you don't have a work-life balance, then you are at more risk of your stress levels developing on into mental illness. And that's a warning sign, that's that boundary. And as much as it's great to push yourself, you have to recognize your limitations. Yeah.
How do you recognize your limitations?
Know your early warning signs. So know what it is in your body that says to you, right, I'm stressed here. I've had enough. Yeah. So usually you'll have your own wee things. You might start to tap or move, or you might feel your heart palpitation. So stress itself is a physical response initially. So that fight or flight, but when you're stressed, you'll have a sensation in your body that is showing. So you might be sweating, you might be itchy. People will get itchy, they'll get irritated, they'll start to procrastinate. They're not able to absorb the words or connect the words together. You'll have behavioral responses where people in extreme. We have this lovely wee video of this man, and he literally lifts the computer and fires it at the man behind him because he's just had enough. But we do go on and we push ourselves too much. So it's recognizing your early warning sign as what is it, and I would say your viewers again, what's one behavior or one physical response that you have, and it's particular to you. It's not somebody else's. It's what do you do, and what do you feel, or what's the sensation in your body that says you need a break? I need to decompress here, or I need to step out for a moment.
Yeah.
And that's just to calm your nervous system back down again so that your body start recognize, right, okay, I'm okay here and I can start again. But then you're going back in calm.
Yeah. Do you think we, as a society, struggle to like think about our needs over, you know, the likes that you were talking about the workplace there? Like you'd almost prioritize other people over yourself. Is that like a common? And is it more common at certain ages where, like, I know for us, like one of the things we sort of talk about as a friend group is you're wanting to push and do things because you feel like it's benefiting you, but at the same time, does it really, you know, going in and staying a couple of hours extra in work, is it really benefiting you in a sense? So I suppose, like, do you feel, you know, whenever you're going into these places and doing the programs, is there a sense of people who just aren't thinking about themselves and not maybe taking time for mindfulness? And
I think that people can get very much wrapped up in work as their identity. And so they would associate, well, that's who I am. You know, what I do for a job or whatever, that's who I am. And I think a good question to ask yourself sometimes is, who am I without my work? Who would I be if I didn't have this job?
Deep.
that's deep. But I think that's actually so useful because
think about it, like.
yeah.
It is.
I don't know.
It is because we put, if you put, you know, a good exercise to do is, have you ever heard of the Wheel of Life?
Nope.
So
We live
wheel.
wheel of life.
The wheel of
Wheel
life.
of life.
Yeah.
We live life. I thought you said.
Sorry.
It's my ballerina diet. Yeah, I'm not getting it.
So it's literally a wheel, or
yeah.
you sometimes get it in a grid, but it's maybe identifying, you know, the different parts of your life. Like, so you have your friends, you have socializing, you have your finances, you have your family, you have your work, you have if you're a parent or whatever. And then you have like 9 different categories, and then you take a look at how much time you spent in each one and where you focus most of your thinking time or your energy. And a lot of the time people will focus a lot in their work. And so you think, well, if that section was taken away, what about all these other sections? Whereas if you have a more balanced grid, if that section was taken away, you're not going to fall into depression or a low mood or a sheer panic because there's nothing else in your life. So it is about balance. Now, in saying that, work takes up, you know, 8 to 10 hours of everybody's day. So it is a big chunk of your life, but it's putting all those other things in. It's making sure that you have time for your spirituality, you have time for your hobbies and interests, you have time to be active, you have time for your family and friends. Because if something happens and you need them and you haven't, it's a bit like watering your plant. If you haven't watered that plant, it's not going to be there for you. So yeah, bit deep, but yeah.
But I think it's deep because it's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there'll be people listening to this while out or on or driving or something, and they maybe need to stop and think for a while. Like,
Yeah.
I think especially though, probably the age we're at when we're like not long after uni, and it's like your work's almost like you need to get a job, you need to like start like building that income without your wealth. People want to buy houses and stuff.
Of course.
Like it does become like almost like an obsession. You sort of do forget about all the other stuff outside of that.
yeah. And I suppose like this might be a pretty, because I know we've touched on a few aspects of, you know, what we face on a day-to-day basis from a young age up to you know, like to our age. But I suppose it might be a pretty broad question, but for you being in this line of work for 10 years, like what do you see as like a contributing factor? Is there any like sort of things that you stand back and over the past 10 years and go, that's really come on in terms of, is it more workplace stress or is it phones, or is there any sort of things that you're like, it's just quite harrowing when you see some of the statistics?
I think definitely workplace stress is a huge thing. I think that you'll find that a lot more people will take time off now for workplace stress. And a lot of people previously would have went to the doctor with like a physical symptom, but they were actually stressed, but they would have marked the physical symptom down as the reason why they were off work. Whereas now people will say, I'm off
Yeah.
because of stress. I think if you hit that burnout, I think definitely we're seeing more of that, and that is a longer recovery. So if people don't manage their stress levels and they go on into burnout, that's months of a journey, to get back to work again.
How would you define burnout? Like could that
Just
be like
pure exhaustion?
yeah.
You've hit the point where you have to take time off work, and the signs will have been there long before you get to that stage. But it's just got to the point where you need to take time off work because now you're really feeling that you can't cope and you're just so tired that you need time out. And often people will need maybe medication or therapy in order to realign or readjust back into the workplace again. It's just overwhelm.
Is that common more? Like Ross is saying, is like burnout becoming a lot more common now?
I think it is. People are not listening to the warning signs of stress because they're pushing themselves that wee bit further. And I think that that's probably a thing in society, and particularly social media and all of the, I suppose, what would you say? The heights get higher.
Aspiration. And I think like that's a good point, because even with like the access everyone has now, and like we've mentioned like influencers, but even like people who run businesses now, like I always think back, like maybe years ago, you could obviously speak better on this than me, but like it would almost be like you'd see someone with a nice car and you'd be like, oh, they're doing well. But now it's like on social media, like people who own companies, like the likes of Ben Francis owns Gymshark and stuff, like they're like personalities now, like they're celebrities, like people aspire to be like that, whereas beforehand it was like that never really was the case.
And I suppose it's now like, what's wrong with having an ordinary life? The simple life, the simple pleasures of, and we're now having to train ourselves to take the simple pleasures. A walk on the beach, a ride on your bicycle, or whatever. Like, I don't know, when I was growing up, I'm much older than you, but when I was growing up, those were just things you did every day.
Yeah.
Whereas now, that's not, even when my daughter was growing up, they weren't out, out playing on the bicycle or doing things. And I know it's like, she tells me I'm back in the 1800s or something like that, but it's very much changed. We now have to train ourselves to go do those things, to decompress.
I suppose it's a thing now where people are watching that on their phone. They're like, "Oh, I'd love to go out and do that," but there's just like, they could be doing it, but
they could, yeah. So I think definitely society has changed and the expectations, but there seems to be a bit of a swing around now happening, where people are more, and your influencers are talking more about their mental health, and a lot of them are genuinely talking about experiencing, maybe anxiety disorders or depression when they were at school or when they were, and they didn't have the opportunity to talk about it. And I think that that's a really good thing, because people can connect to that. But at the same time, I think there is that move away from like, it's okay to just be yourself and have your own interests and be quirky and be different and not have to follow the crowd. Because most people, what you see in social media is not, it's not actually their lives.
I think it's like around the education of the topic where, you see a lot of people, and we've talked about this a lot, influencers, and they come out and it's like, oh, I suffer from depression. And then it's almost like it starts this wave of then other people maybe, they're not educated on the topic. They just kind of go, well, I felt a bit sad today, so I must suffer from depression. And I know it is something that we've sort of discussed where, where does it stop? Where does it start? So I suppose like understanding like, I'm doing an exam today and I feel stressed doesn't necessarily mean that you suffer from anxiety, but on that particular day you are anxious.
Yeah.
And yeah, I suppose it's that sort of education, and that's why, like, when you hear about the likes of Aware and stuff going into schools, like, I think I speak for all of us, like from a young age, we like that's a good thing.
Yeah, it's great.
Because there is so much pressure now, even with like I was talking to my sister about this the other week because I have a 4-year-old nephew, and like I sometimes look at him and go like, you are in for it. Like the amount that you're going to experience that's different from what I experienced.
Yeah.
Where like whenever we were at school, like, and we were on the brink of like mobile phones at that stage, where we had mobile phones but weren't as well connected.
Yes.
But like, you know, you maybe got the piss taken out of you in the playground, you went home and it stopped. Whereas now
The cyberbullying and stuff like that, it's really a big thing.
Yeah.
Has that
Absolutely.
gotten bad?
We would really like to focus a wee bit more on that now in our programs. We're going to work this year on developing a wee bit more detail and content into that, and maybe partner with some other organizations who can maybe give expert advice on how to avoid those things, or to notice the signs, or to protect yourself. Like that is a big thing. You know, so
I suppose the funding's probably something we could be talking a bit about, because like you've mentioned a couple of things, and then like it's always like a mention then of funding. Like, is that like one of, I suppose, the more difficult things you face with Aware and trying to like, you know, help everyone? It's not as easy as that. Like,
no, and maybe we'd love to be helping everybody. So I suppose because we're a charity, we're always dependent on funding. Now, thankfully, we do get funded partly by the Public Health Agency, who would fund us to deliver programs into the schools. But again, it's only in certain regions, and it's only a certain number of schools or a certain number of programs. So, I mean, in the primary schools, we are only hitting an eighth of the primary schools, you know. I know. You're thinking, well, which eighth? You know. And so that's the unfortunate thing that, you know, every charity faces, because you only have a certain amount of funding, you only have a certain amount of programs. But the thing is, you have to focus. It's a bit like what we teach. You have to focus on what you are doing and what you are doing well. And so, but, you know, we have a fundraising department, which you can get involved in loads of events if you want to. So we have Viking races. We have Giant Steps, which is a big walk up the North Coast we just had a few weeks ago, which was fab. We had 500 people on it.
class.
It was class. That Causeway Coast, absolutely amazing. So there's sea splashes. You were talking about the sea swimming earlier too. We could rope you into that. And we're always looking for like corporate partners. You know, we deal a lot with the workplaces who maybe partner with us, and you know, we'll deliver programs into their workplace and we'll support their workforce. So we're always trying to keep on top of, I suppose, the things that are impacting people's mental health, and also, always trying to get the funding to reach more people. But we have experienced quite a bit of growth over the last few years, so we're very grateful for that as well.
What would be one area, if you could pick yourself, that you'd be like, I'd really like us to focus more on that? Like, is there anything you think
we had
a bit neglected?
We had a great project there called Back to Life, Back to Normality, which was particularly for people in recovery. Or trying to recover. So people who were experiencing low mood, diagnosis of depression, anxiety disorder, or bipolar. And it was 12-week program, 6 weeks or living life to the full, and 6 week follows CBT mindfulness. But that funding has just ended in March, and we've developed such great relationships with the GP federations all over Northern Ireland, and there's new teams there. And so the GPs are now referring into those programs. And so for that just to suddenly stop, which is typical of funding, and particularly in Northern Ireland as well, for that just to stop is a real problem for us, because we want to continue to be able to offer that service, and to be able to offer the GPs and the mental health practitioners a service that they can recommend to people whilst they're on waiting lists. So that was a service that filled a gap while someone's maybe waiting for assessment or for one-to-one therapy.
Has the government, like, obviously things are sort of starting to get back into fruition now, but I suppose there were so many years where like Stormont was obviously closed. Like, did that have much of an effect on you?
Huge effect. And there is a mental health strategy from 2021 to 31, so it's a 10-year strategy, but we're now in 2024, so we're 3 years in, and so that gap of even getting that started and rolled out. Now we are involved in talks.
Was that like you're 3 years in and nothing's started type of thing?
No, I mean there is movement now,
Yeah.
and it's great that we have the assembly and things are moving. But you're sort of filling those gaps then. But it would be good for the funding to be released in that and get it going.
Yep.
Now, one of the things that we are particularly proud of and aware is the perinatal stuff, which is the pregnancy and after birth. So previously we only had services in the Belfast Trust, and there are now what they call multidisciplinary teams in all 5 trusts in Northern Ireland. It's not just us now. We're part of the Maternal Mental Health Alliance, but my colleague Rhonda would be the representative here in Northern Ireland. So we have really campaigned for that for quite a few years, really, to get that service, because we realised that there were services in some parts of Northern Ireland and not in others. And that's what you find, young people's, adults, all the services, there's a service, and if there's funding for it, it's great. And if there isn't, fortunately. So it's I suppose trying to get mental health and mental health services and mental health funding the same all over the country, so that people can access the service they need at the time that they need it, and they're not having to wait, because those waiting times are having a massive impact on people's well-being.
Yeah.
Where do you think we sort of stand, in comparison with the rest of the world, and how we do treat mental health? I know a lot of people always say we're sort of trailing behind a bit here, but what do you think yourself from personal experience?
In the UK, we, compared to the UK, who would have 1 in 5 people would experience a mental health problem. In Northern Ireland, we're 1 in 4. Right. So we're 25% higher need and less of a service.
Would you say like that 25%? Yeah, it's more, but do you think there's people who also have problems or aren't even coming forward, who aren't being accounted for?
100%. And if anything out of the podcast today, that's what I would love, is people to come forward. Maybe we haven't talked enough about the signs and symptoms, but there are lots of information in our organisation and Aware. We have lots of fact sheets, we have lots of signposting, we have an information email that you can email into, you can attend our support groups. You don't have to go to a medical professional to attend the support
That's
group.
something I actually wanted to ask, is say someone doesn't want to go to a GP and sort of maybe would rather just speak to a group of people, how do you go about finding that? Or
just send an email through to us at if you go onto the website www.aware-na.org and just send a wee email in, or you'll see all the services that we have. But you can attend a support group well tonight. You're too late for tonight, but you can attend one anytime. They run from Tuesdays to Thursdays, and there's morning and evening support groups, and there's 26 of them all over Northern Ireland, so depending on where you live, but you can just go yourself. You don't have to be referred by a GP. And the same for our programs. You can apply for any of our programs, and generally we don't have a waiting list as such. We just have programs up and running.
What can someone expect for if they want to go to a support group? What's the sort of...
So a support group it's a space really just to talk about the illness and how you're feeling, but you can go to the support group and not talk at all, so there's no requirement for you to talk. It's very daunting for people to go to something, especially if you're feeling unwell. So a lot of people would say the biggest step was actually going and walking through the door. But once they walk through the door,
they realised
it was just like a different world, because the people in the support group just hold each other. The support groups are what is called peer support groups, which means that they are led by peers. So people who will have experienced depression, bipolar, high levels of stress or low mood themselves, and there's nobody there to give advice. So it's a space to be listened to, and often it's a space where people can get those thoughts and stuff out of their head without feeling judged, because people in that room will have been there too, and there's nothing said in the room is shared outside the room, so it's a confidential space. But it's also a space to learn about the illness, how other people have are managing their illness, tools that they have used, places they have went, techniques that have worked. So it's a space really to learn about yourself and just be yourself. Because depression is not who you are. It's just something that you're experiencing. It's the same as like if somebody was a diabetic or they had epilepsy. It's something that you have or that you're experiencing. It's not who you are.
Yeah.
And that would be a big part of what we would say, you are not the illness.
And can you overcome depression and anxiety?
Absolutely.
Like, is it not? Is it something?
It's very common.
Yeah, because you hear about people going on like antidepressants and stuff. Like, is it normal for like you overcome that and you don't have to go through that again, or is it like you have to deal with this for the rest of your life type of thing?
No, so depression is very common and it's very treatable. But yes, you absolutely can overcome it, and many people will have had depressive episodes in their lives. Some people will have recurrent depression, where maybe they've experienced depression at a certain time and then maybe at another time in their lives, but in between they haven't experienced it at all. So yeah, some people will experience postnatal depression completely out of the blue, never were feeling depressed or anxious before, and they experience it, or other people will develop it through an event. Some people, it can be related to their personality or their environment. For other people, it can be hereditary. So clinical depression, you usually do require medication. And that, again, would be up to the medical professionals to decide whether you come off that or not. Now, again, it's very important for anybody listening to never, ever come off your medication without the guidance of a GP, because there's a transition period when you're taking your medication, and there's a transition period coming off. Now, anywhere we don't talk about medication or different types of medication at all. We just would recommend either medication, self-help, or talking therapies as support for depression.
What would be your advice to someone who, like, say, maybe is taking medication? It's like, I think this maybe is common enough, or like sometimes, like, I do think it affects you at the start a lot, and then maybe they're thinking to come off it before it like starts working. Maybe
again, I would say go back to your GP and say that, only because we are not medical professionals. And like any medication, there could be side effects, or it could just be a transitional period, but generally it'll take up to 8 weeks. For your body to adjust. But attend your GP or mental health professional and get their advice. If you're taking a medication that's not agreeing with you, please don't just stop it or whatever. Go back again and outline what's happening or what you're experiencing.
I think like you briefly touched on it a wee while ago, but just if someone is listening to this at the minute, what are like the common signs of you maybe need to talk or you need to reach out to someone? Doesn't necessarily mean, obviously, after you've educated us on this, like, it doesn't necessarily mean you have depression.
No.
But what are some of the common signs that, if someone's maybe listening to this right now and they have it in the back of their head?
The common signs of depression would lie in the 4 categories, of what a person would be thinking, feeling, their physical response in their body, and their behaviour. So a lot of the times you would notice that behavioural changes, so withdrawal is a big sign of depression. Somebody avoiding conversations, avoiding people, avoiding circumstances. You might find that someone loses their confidence. So I mentioned earlier about not feeling like yourself, but also maybe just, losing your confidence, doing things that you did normally without thinking about it. Feeling very tired, very lethargic, no energy, not wanting to do things. So and then you have the thoughts, which a symptom of depression would be very intrusive thoughts, and thoughts that, come quite rapid and are overwhelming and usually not very positive. They're not very encouraging. So thoughts of, feeling useless or stupid or good for nothing, or, I can't do anything right, and all those things, different types of thoughts. Again, sorry, I'm interjecting here, but we do have program will help you deal with those unhelpful thoughts and identify the different types of them as well. And then again, just feeling, really low or useless, or just loss of self. A lot of the time with depression's loss of self. But again, we're talking, there's mild, moderate, and severe.
Yeah.
So the severity of that would be very important. So if someone was really, those thoughts were very intrusive to the point they were not sure of, they could even have suicidal ideation, but that's severe depression. Mild to moderate would be that where you're starting to feel just quite low and it's going on for a longer period of time. And often people will assume that somebody with depression just lies in bed and they don't get up and do whatever, and that's not the case. People can function quite well with depression, but they don't generally feel like themselves or feel like, and also it feels it's quite exhausting because the person is not putting on an act but trying to get through the day and fight the depression. So often it's actually it's the fighting the illness that tires you out much more. So sometimes acknowledging that actually I'm not well is the start of recovery, because you can give up the fight and then you can start to use the tools to manage it as opposed to fight it.
And I suppose it's a matter of catching it sooner rather than later as well.
100%. Yeah. 100%.
That's what I was going to ask, like, in terms of that's all stuff that you can look like inward and identify. But sort of what you were saying there in terms of like people find really good ways of masking it.
Yeah.
It reminds me of that I forget what football team it was put up the video when it was the two fans, and one was very like bubbly and was great crack, and then I think it was West Brom or
That was
Norwich?
really impactful,
Norwich?
wasn't
I think it might have been Norwich.
Yeah.
And then at the end of the video, you had the guy sitting to the left, and he was very withdrawn, and you'd almost know where the narrative's going, but then it goes in a completely different direction.
That's
so
true.
I suppose, like, maybe thinking about someone who is listening to this right now, is there ways of, if someone is really good at the masking of that, is there little telltale signs that say, someone like, say, if myself maybe noticing a change in Tommy or whatever can maybe notice, or is there just sometimes no way of knowing?
If you notice the change, but often, if somebody is really good at masking it, then there's it's not. And I mean, you often find that when people have, maybe quite severe depression, and then people are shocked if they then disclose, that I wasn't well. I think, I don't know, it's a hard question, because I suppose there are people, depression doesn't look like depression a lot of the time. It's the same as anxiety. You can't see it. They're invisible illnesses. So sometimes you can see the signs and symptoms, and I think just unfortunately sometimes you can't.
I suppose it's having that environment within a friend group or a family group where it's like, look, you can talk to me and I'm always here type thing, even though you may not. I suppose it's like checking in on your friends and your family members, even if you don't necessarily feel that they need checked in on in that way. Yeah.
Just how are you?
Yeah.
So that's something you'd like doing courses and stuff, whether it be like family or friends, just like checking in regularly, regardless of whether you think they're in a good place or not. Like.
I mean, just always having the space for those open conversations. How was your day? How's your new job going? How's work? How's opening it up? So that people can answer more fully the opportunity, and also just creating a space to listen, because I think that's the biggest thing. People will go, how's your day? But you're walking about doing something else. As we said, we're not stopping. You're not actually, if you see somebody going to talking or said, actually, it was rubbish, or, or I'm not sure, or whatever, then that's an opening. What are you not sure about? You know, to stop and actually listen to somebody. And again, the other thing, as I said in the groups, the biggest thing that will make a difference to somebody is that you're not judging them.
Yeah.
You know, so if somebody says, you know, I'm having a bad day or whatever, you know, you're not answering back and saying, oh, well, sure, why would you be feeling like that? It's actually acknowledging.
I feel like that is such a like Irish cultural thing, though. Like it's very much
get up
that,
and
like,
get on.
Get on with. Like, what are you on about? You know?
Do you know what I often hear people saying, and it really riles me, is suck it up. And you think, but sometimes people just can't. You have no idea what it took for that person to get to that point of actually saying, I'm not coping so well at the minute, or I'm struggling. If somebody ever says to you, I'm struggling, they mean they're struggling.
Yeah.
Because if they've said, I'm struggling, they've probably been struggling for quite a while before they've said that.
Yeah.
So it won't be just today.
Yeah. Such a good point, though.
Yeah.
I think I just think back to like in high school, maybe you would have been like, or school, you would have been like, oh, trying to get off, being like, I don't feel well today. And your parents would have been like, oh, wise up, you're going to school.
Yeah. Get up and get on with it.
Yeah.
I think we can still always be capable of that anyway. But well, it is.
Or wipe it off, sort of thing.
Yeah. But I think it's the more regular. You know, when you notice someone. But always keep a wee eye out.
Yeah.
And just check in. Are you okay?
Yeah.
How's things going?
Yeah. I think that's a good place to end. I think we've definitely, I think one of the biggest things that it's so, when you've said it, and I hope people listening to this or watching this are thinking the same thing as me. And, you know, it isn't rocket science to just be a bit more mindful and like educate yourself on this stuff. And I think it's like looking at it from that sort of view, and just listen to the likes of this podcast or go and read, you know, advice on Aware NI's website and educate yourself and just learn more about it and be a bit more understanding. I think
and
one
check
thing
in with yourself.
Yeah.
You know, the more you check in with yourself, the more you'll be able to check in with other people. You know, it's practicing those techniques yourself.
Yeah. But it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast, and thank you so much for being so open and for talking about this stuff. And obviously for anybody listening, if you do need any resources or you do need to reach out, all of the information will be in the link in the description of this podcast. So please do feel free and reach out, and obviously take the help and speak to someone as well if you are feeling in any way like what we've been discussing. So Marina, thank you so much for coming on.
You're so welcome. Thank you.
All the best.
For having me.